Hello everyone, my name is Carlos and today I'm going to show you my take on Evolvio. If you haven't heard of Evolvio, it's basically an evolution simulator that uses the genetic algorithm and neural networks to evolve creatures that live in a closed world. So one of the first things you'll notice with these creatures is that their eyes flicker a lot. They only have one eye and they flicker a lot. So what I did is in the previous version, the output that was basically like the memory output, it was just an output. It didn't do anything other than get sent back in as an input. I thought we should use something that they're already using that isn't going to conversion value, that isn't going to get isn't going to blow up or something. I kind of thought of it as making the creatures aware of what they're doing. The other change that I made was I drastically reduced the number of neurons in the inner layer, because I noticed that when we had a bunch of neurons as in the inner layer, only a few of them were being used. So I did this, and I also did it because for performance reasons. And I actually noticed that this improved things drastically. They behave way more interestingly, and despite only having 3 neurons, the diversity that I've seen with different simulations has been pretty astounding. I have a config file that will change these values, but 3 seems to be sufficient enough. If with 2 or less, they don't really do much, but with 3 you already start seeing some really interesting behaviors. Now that I explain you guys the architecture of these neural networks, I want to show you what they end up evolving into. So one of the things that I saw develop as a behavior that I thought was really interesting that I haven't seen in a while is this kind of this thing where they hibernate, which I thought was really cool because I haven't seen this in a while. And as you can tell, they move around, but when the temperature goes down, they start hibernating. They just stop, and that helps them save energy, because if you click on them, they're hardly losing any energy. But as soon as they start moving, they will start losing energy, but they compensate for that by eating food. So it's like, well, there's no food, so let's preserve our energy while there's no food. And so that's essentially what hibernation is. And this doesn't always happen. Like, this is just one population that evolved that way. It kind of looks cool when you speed it up, because they kind of move and then they stop, and move and then stop. And of course, these guys also know how to avoid water, and they move very quickly too, I've noticed. Oh, and these numbers here, the second number is the number of how many generations. So it's been a lot of generations for these. The other thing that I want to show you is an example of a simulation that I could just load. These creatures and they evolved separately for a while. So these guys have really long eyes, whereas these guys, they have much shorter eyes. And I think it's because since they're avoiding water and most of the nutrition is right next to the water, if their eyes were longer, they would probably say stop right before the richer block, the block with more calories. And so I think they've adapted shorter eyes in this case in order to be able to eat from that tile that's right next to the water. Whereas these guys, they're not. They get most of the food around this area, and it's more evenly distributed, I guess. And same with this, even though these guys, well, I guess their eyes are kind of long. So what I'm going to show you guys now is another population that evolved over a very long period of time, where there was very little food, and basically they started out in a normal environment, but then the environment very slowly got colder and colder, and so the amount of food available was less and less. They had to evolve to the point to where they had to be really good at getting food. I'm going to load this population on this map, and I want to show you how they end up taking over this whole area in a pretty short amount of time. The creatures I'm going to load, they're blue, so they're very similar in color to these guys. In order to distinguish them, I'm going to change them to red. This is all kind of random. There we go. And then I'm going to load them right here. So these are these are the simulation files. So you can load a whole simulation, or you can load a population of creatures. So they're all crammed into a little circle. So now they're gonna There's gonna be a weird explosion because they push each other out of the way. So you'll start to see right away that they're kind of, they seem a little bit more just better at surviving. I mean, you look at how they move, and it's just so, the movements don't look random, and these guys don't move very randomly either, but these guys are definitely like on a different level. Because I mean, look at how their eyes move, and you look at their brains, and their brains are just firing like crazy. Like all the nodes are moving and everything, and you know, I think there's something going on here. Like there's definitely something to that. Before long, they're gonna take over this whole map, and these are actually, this is a pretty formidable group of creatures too. If I showed you, if I did that with a much weaker or less evolved group of creatures, they would demolish this whole place. But you can already see it, they're starting to slowly take over. And notice how when the temperature goes down, they don't move as much, but when the temperature goes up and there's more food, they start kind of moving around more, because moving takes energy. Again, I'm gonna leave it there just so you guys can look at how they move, and how they seem very, you know, like they're chasing after food, and I don't know, they seem very lifelike to me. And I think that's something that I think in order to have food webs or something, I think this is a prerequisite, is they have to be smart to begin with. And yeah, and they're very, I mean, they look like they're competing so hard to survive, and the reason why is because they evolved for so long. In fact, I can show the generations here. You know, the red guys, the original guys, they have about 1,600 generations. These guys are like 50,000 generations, so they're much more fit. But yeah, they're starting to make their way over here, but you can kind of tell that they're already taking up this area. And you might also be able to tell that some of the creatures are purple. That's because, you know, if you mix blue and red, you get purple. So these are actually hybrid species, but sometimes they just get traits for one of the parents. Although you can kind of tell that the purple ones do behave a little bit differently from the other ones. Like this guy's eye gets really, really long. I'm gonna leave this running, and then we can come back to it later. I want to show a population that exhibits swarm intelligence. So I'm going to come back here again, open up another instance, and I'm going to lower the temperature here, and then have the population be 0, because I want to show an example of swarm intelligence that I've noticed with some of the populations. And you can see that they kind of clump together when there's not a lot of food. You'll start seeing it in a little bit. They're kind of looking at each other and say, oh, you're right there, I'm gonna get close to you in case you die, and you drop food so that I can eat it. And so that's why you have all these little clumps of creatures. One thing too, I want to show how these creatures will clump together and then they separate, and they clump together and then they separate again, because suddenly there's food available, and they can just go out and look for food. It's only whenever the food is really low that they start following each other, and they stop ignoring each other, because you know, it's kind of like a second resort kind of thing, it seems. So here it's cold, and then it gets warm, they start moving around, and then it gets cold again. And I think it's even more noticeable when the temperature is even higher. Here you can see it more clearly now. So it's clump together and then they separate, clump together, separate. And so it's like pretty interesting evolutionary strategy. That's swarm intelligence. I'm gonna go back to this one, see how this is going, and it looks like they took over most of the area. In fact, I think these are the last. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so I think they pretty much wiped out the whole population. And what you'll notice now is that the population's like much lower now, and I think the reason why is because I guess they're more efficient at eating. It's kind of weird. I've noticed this a lot, where when you first start a simulation, you have this huge population that eats very inefficiently, and then as some creatures start to eat more food and more efficiently, they kind of, the ones that aren't eating as efficiently will start to die out. So you have this sudden, like, how do I put it? because they're so efficient at grabbing food, they're not letting others get food, which means that there's not a lot of food for more creatures. I hope I explained that right, but that's basically the idea. But yeah, very drastic population reduction. Another thing I want to show you was niches. These yellow guys, they seem to be better at evolving in an area like this, as opposed to these guys who are, they seem to be better in this kind of area. After a long time, what typically happens is one population will outcompete the other one. And so what that means is that eventually all the creatures will end up being one color. And this can happen either because a single population has, like I said, outcompeted the other one, or it can be that their colors keep mixing together until they just kind of average out to some color. It's very rare for these creatures to remain as two different colors. If they're like on the same landmass, typically after, I don't know, like 1,000 years or maybe even 5,000 years, they'll eventually converge to one color. And these creatures here, they haven't. And I've noticed that it happens a lot with this map, where I'll randomize all the colors, and you always have a group that will develop on this side and a group that will develop over here. Believe it or not, these two different populations, they've been separated for many generations. I mean, I would say over 30,000, and they've been inhabiting the same landmass for that whole time. And the reason why one hasn't, outcompeted the other is because they I guess they kind of adapted to their own niches,